all of you beneath me. I am a god, you dull creature, and I will not be bullied by that.
The 2020s so far have been a bit of an unprecedented time for comic books. In 2021 alone, the industry shot up to a little over $2 billion, a 62% increase from the previous year's $1.28 billion. And I can hear you saying right now, wow, that's a huge amount of growth for comics. I can't believe the industry made that much money. That's so incredible. Wait, you're not saying that? Oh, okay, what, you're saying you don't know why you should care? Yeah. You're saying that this is predominantly an anime channel? Yeah. You're saying that I should just get to the point already and that I should stop dragging out this bit? Okay, well, you don't have to be so rude about it. So on the surface, yeah, these numbers are neat. However, it's when you dive further in where things become truly interesting. Out of these 2 billion sales, manga made up a whopping 70% of the industry total. And while since 2023, the overall comic book industry has decreased to 1.87 billion, manga still makes up nearly half of that number, with 43% of the total market according to research conducted by ICV2, and is still considered to hold the highest percentage out of the different categories for types of comics sold. Meanwhile, mainstream American superhero comics, what many consider to be manga's primary opponent, only made up 15% of that total. It's clear that manga is kind of cleaning house right now, and there's a lot of examples of this. In 2023, the senior director for licensing at Dark Horse Comics revealed that manga, despite only being 1% of their total output, made up 66% of the company's sales. I mean, One Piece, a manga, is close to surpassing Superman as the most successful comic of all time. Freaking Superman, dude. You know, the one that's like dun 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 dun. Yes, that one. The one that's been around for 80 years. There's a very real possibility that One Piece, a manga that isn't even 30 years old yet, could dethrone Superman in our lifetime. That's so insane, but it also makes you wonder, how did this happen exactly? How did manga become such a massive force and that it's now seemingly dominating superhero comics, what were once seen as the comic book industry? Well, in order to figure this out, we first have to look at the primary medium in which these books are advertised. And it's here that we get into the world of television and film. In the 2010s, superhero movies, specifically Marvel movies, absolutely dominated the theaters. Avengers Endgame, what was considered the 10-year culmination of an entire cinematic universe, became the highest grossing film of all time, generating $2,797,501,328. Superhero movies were on top of the pop culture mountain. However, after this, things started to slowly change. Nowadays, opinions on Marvel films and TV shows have begun to sour. While they do still have well-received films like Guardians of the Galaxy 3, Spider-Man No Way Home, and Deadpool and Wolverine, now it seems as though the well-received films are no longer outpacing the disappointments. In 2023, Marvel Studios would release The Marvels, and it would go on to become the lowest-grossing film in MCU history. And I mean, just this year, Captain America: Brave New World released to incredibly mixed reviews, and has seen a major drop-off in its second week in theaters. It's no exaggeration to say that the film industry for a while now has been kind of bloated with superhero films, and people are beginning to move on to other things. Auteur films like Oppenheimer, or even video game movies, what was once considered to be the laughingstock of Hollywood, are now seeing unprecedented amounts of success. Marvel was once the king, but now its crown is very much in question. Meanwhile, anime is doing incredible right now. In the time that superhero films have been declining, anime has been rising. And what definitely helps things is that anime is much more directly tied to manga. If someone gets caught up on the One Piece anime, for example, they can very easily buy the manga to pick up where the anime story left off. The anime and manga feed into one another seamlessly. Meanwhile, comic book movies, while they draw from several different sources, are typically their own thing. They don't feed into the comics nearly as much as the anime do, and thus there's not as much incentive from the viewer to dive into that source material. However, I think this problem goes much deeper than just how these comics are advertised and promoted. I want to ask all of you a hypothetical question. Let's say that I'm someone who wants to get into the One Piece manga, and naturally I ask you, where do you think I should start? No, seriously, this is a real question. How do I get into the One Piece manga? I'm serious. Go ahead. Think about it and tell me your answer. I'll wait. Okay, so I'm willing to bet there is a large majority of you who simply answered start at volume 1. And that would be absolutely correct. One Piece has a definitive beginning where you're supposed to start, as is the case with most manga. It's simple, intuitive, and easily accessible. Now, why would you tell someone who wants to get into Spider-Man comics? I imagine that if you were to ask any number of comic book fans this question, you would get so many varied answers. And that's because the truth of the matter is that there is no definitive answer to this question. Superhero comics can be incredibly overwhelming. Any number of series and characters can have years upon years of different runs, spin-offs, reboots, alternate storylines. It kind of comes off as a jumbled mess to new readers. And not helping things is the fact that so many of these comics are part of a universe that seeps into a large number of other different series. Here, let me give you an example. When I was in college, I really wanted to get into IDW Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I already really liked Ninja Turtles, but the art here was so incredible, and I really dug the overall tone, and the backstory for the Turtles was really interesting in this specific iteration. I really wanted to keep reading. However, there was something that kept happening in the comic that really turned me off. Every now and then, the characters would talk about events that had just never happened within the comic itself. And when they did talk about these things, a little box would show up right in the corner telling me to check out this specific issue from this spin-off comic that explains what they're talking about. And I just really didn't like that. I just wanted a simple, painless reading experience and didn't feel like dividing my attention amongst a bunch of different spin-offs that, quite frankly, I just didn't have any interest in. And yeah, you can make the argument, well, you don't have to read all of those different series, you can just ignore it. But the issue with that is that not everyone is going to share that same sentiment. For some people, they don't like just ignoring details and not having the full picture. I imagine there's a good amount of people like me who get alienated by this kind of stuff. And this is a huge aspect of comics. I mean, just look at the massive crossover events that Marvel or DC have every now and then. The 2015 Secret Wars event had its own comic dedicated to it, but it was also spread out amongst so many different series, with nearly 50 different tie-ins all related to it. And that's not even mentioning past series that happened before Secret Wars that also had a part to play in the storyline. And look, I get it. I can understand why this is appealing to people. It's a grand, epic story that encapsulates every corner of the universe. But it can also be incredibly alienating to new readers. Anyone who's looking to get into comics probably isn't going to get anything out of it the same way that people have been invested for years will. And to me, that's the ultimate conundrum when it comes to getting into comics. They're both alienating, but also kind of strangely stagnant. I'm definitely not the first person to say this, but I feel as though superheroes have become kind of homogenous in this day and age. It's getting to the point that it doesn't feel like there's a ton of variety in what superheroes can offer. And not helping things is the ever apparent reality that these comics will usually adhere to a status quo. It's well known at this point that superhero comics rely very heavily on established characters and lore. That's not to say that things don't change in comics or there aren't big shakeups, but it's also not wrong to say that it's safe to assume that a lot of things will go back to normal in the long run. Characters will get their powers back, they will beat the bad guys, and most of the time, they will come back to life. And this is because superheroes aren't just a single writer. They're a smaller part of not only an entire universe, but an entire company. And this means that, yeah, they're victim to executive meddling. Certain things might not be allowed to happen in a series because of something else happening in a different series, or because they need the story to go in a certain direction to prepare for a big event. And not only that, but sometimes even things outside of the comics determine what goes in them. Do you guys remember when the X-Men were super downplayed in the comics because Disney didn't have the movie rights to the X-Men series, and so they wanted to devalue that franchise? Yeah, that's something that can happen. Meanwhile, with manga, you're typically getting a single creative vision. That's not to say that outside forces, such as editors or even fans, don't play a part, but for the most part, it's the author's story, and there's not nearly as many hands involved in the process. Along with this, there's just a lot more variety within the world of manga. There's so many stories and genres that simply stand on their own and appeal to a much wider audience. Superhero comics, for the most part, appeal mostly to male audiences. That's not saying that women can't like comic books, but historically, it's a male-dominated medium. Whereas with manga, it's easy for anyone of any background, belief, or gender to enjoy these stories because it's just not nearly as homogenized. And I think that's the ultimate strength of manga. American superhero comics are usually a specific thing, but Japanese manga can be anything. And that's why it'll only continue to grow. So I have to ask the question, does this mean that American comics are going to die? Honestly, no, I don't think so. I need to clarify that I don't hate superheroes or anything like that. None of this comes from a place of malice, more so just observation. And from what I can observe, although superhero comics don't dominate the market like they used to, they're still generally doing pretty okay in the grand scheme of things. If anything, I think manga represents less the death of superhero comics and more of a shift in what American comics will become more popular. There will always be a demand for superheroes, but I also have to wonder with these trends if Marvel or DC feel the need to make any shifts in their strategies. Perhaps to more standalone stories that focus less on established characters and more on new ideas and individual authors. That's hard to say because, I mean, why do people go to DC and Marvel? It's for superheroes, and if they stop providing that, then I can imagine people will begin to lose interest. What I think will happen is Marvel and DC will stick to what they know best, and instead we'll begin to see a larger influx from other publishers and creators that are more concerned with telling very focused stories from people with one creative vision. And I think that that's a good thing. In this day and age, what people want the most are just good stories they can relate to, easily pick up and read, and have a beginning, middle, and end. And that's something that manga will always be able to provide. No matter who you are, there's always going to be a story specifically for you. And that, to me, is the true beauty of manga.